And then the questions started coming up about, well, if I start designing my own time, deciding how I want to do things, would I really stick to it? I'm Heather Grzych, and this is the Wisdom of the Body podcast. This podcast explores the idea of body intelligence as the real key to learning the knowledge of life, or what we call Ayurveda in the ancient language of Sanskrit. We do that by connecting with today's creative leaders and experts who will help you listen to your body, trust your gut, and live in deeper harmony with nature. Come join me as we unlock the golden door to clear, direct perception and become very deep listeners. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can also follow us by joining my email at heathergrzych.com or on Instagram at heathergrzych. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. Hey, how do you feel about structure? Just curious, because some people have a really strong reaction when you get them talking about their structures and their routines, even people who are really struggling with their routines. We can all benefit from looking at our routines here and there, and I'll say that this started to become a really big thing for me when I was in my 30s. My 30s were this really big decade of not being a baby any longer, and I felt like a full-on adult when I was in my 30s, even though there were many life experiences I hadn't really gone through yet. For example, I was one of the last in my peer group to have children, so there were certain developmental steps there I hadn't quite taken yet, but I was still in the process of figuring out who I was as an independent being. As you get older, you naturally go through the process of figuring out, well, how do I want to do things my way? And there are different things that might feel like obstacles to that in your life. Maybe it's your job or your boss or something else in your life where you live. It could be a whole bunch of things, your relationship even. So if you can start to work on the routines and the structures of your life in that decade, it makes a huge difference when you're trying to live your life the way you want to. When you're trying to move out of the phase of the baby mind, where we believe that the world is happening to us, and moving into the power mind of suddenly seeing that we have some control over what happens in our lives, and figuring out what that specific balance is, what that specific threshold is of control that we have in our lives. And it's not like all of a sudden we never struggle with this again, but there are certain moments when we really experience a recalibration of that balance of life happening to us versus because of us. We go through this starting as children, and of course it amps up at times like when we're a teenager and starting to drive a car, because that transition's a big one. You know, anytime when you realize you have some of your own agency, you are getting out of your baby mind. You're no longer a child. And in the transition points of life, any one of them, something will change again. So I'll never forget the day I learned about keeping a personal calendar. I was in my early 30s and had a colleague at work who kept a personal calendar. I looked at her calendar one day, and on this calendar, she had all these social events. She was a super social person. She always had something going on, tons of friends, traveled a lot. And I looked at her calendar and was like, whoa, I had a huge realization. If you're familiar with the Myers-Briggs personality assessment, at that time in my life, I was very P rather than J. I wasn't much of a planner in my personal life. I was always going with the flow. But at work, I was really different. I didn't even have a personal calendar. I had a work calendar, but I never had a personal calendar. And outside of work, I played on all these, sports teams. I took writing classes. So my life was fairly structured even outside of work. And I didn't actually need a calendar to keep track of it because I knew where I was going to be going every night of the week after work. And my days were totally scheduled because of work. And if I wasn't scheduled, then I'd be floating freely doing something else, probably because I just needed some space in my life that was unscheduled. Maybe that was fine, right? Because we all need to get some space in our lives and in our calendars, and we certainly need different amounts of it at different times. But because I didn't have a personal calendar, I wasn't following through on a lot of my future visions and goals, and I kept feeling upset that nothing in my life was changing the way I wanted it to. So I got really curious. I asked, what would happen if I set up a personal calendar like my friend over there? Because I had this calendar at work and I was one of these high-performing people that would always get the exceeds expectations on my annual review at work, and I would work longer hours than other people, and I got a lot of opportunities at work because I was such a hard worker. Well, I always went the extra mile, and I did very well. I was good at figuring out how to do a good job at work. And that's probably one of the reasons that my personal calendar did not exist, because I was putting so much of my energy of effectiveness into visioning and achieving in my work, and not enough of that energy into the rest of my life. So I thought, what happens if I use the same skills and just apply them to the things I want in my personal life? Putting together a personal calendar allowed me to just think about how I wanted my time to go when I wasn't on somebody else's time. Because when you have a job and you are working, quote unquote, for someone else, that creates a kind of mindset where you have to do things, quote unquote, for them. And maybe you don't feel like you have as much control as you want. And this is definitely a theme that comes up for anyone who has a quote unquote boss. And I suppose your boss could also be like your wife at home, whoever is your boss in life. So setting up your personal calendar helps balance that out a little bit. Suddenly you have plans for yourself, so there becomes a natural boundary set for something that you want to give attention to. And I was really grateful that I saw my friend's personal calendar that day, because I never thought to set one up for myself. I just never thought about it. And then after I did, it made a world of difference. So then after that, I had to figure out, well, what am I going to put on this calendar? What do I want in my life? How do I want this time to go? Any organized activity is a structure in our life channel, whether that's a job, a class we're taking, or even an organized religion that we're participating in. We don't have to create all of our own structures, but when we are attempting to take back some of our own agency, then we need to intentionally decide what structures we allow ourselves to enter and which we create for ourselves. I noticed that my friend's calendar was full of social engagements. Somehow that made sense to me because she was an only child who grew up in a quiet house, and having lots of friendships was probably something that she craved. But I wasn't nearly the social butterfly that she was, nor did I have any desire to be. But I did know that I wanted to do more yoga, so I scheduled in yoga classes. And I loved traveling, so I scheduled in travel. And I did indeed schedule in some friends as well, and time with the boyfriend that I was dating at the time. I scheduled in time for my personal development, love, exercise, all the things I wanted to make sure I was putting my energy into. And then the questions started coming up about, well, if I start designing my own time, deciding how I want to do things, would I really stick to it? If I wasn't used to, for my personal life, organizing my time as well as I was in my work life, then would it actually work? Or was I really just wanting that time to decompress and not have to schedule anything at all? So I really had to decide that, how much structure I needed for my life at that point, which does change depending on what's going on in your life. Because I knew that there would be no specific consequence to anyone else if I did not follow through on my self-commitments. And somehow it's harder for me to let things slide when I know that someone else is expecting something from me. I wasn't sure that I would be able to do the same kind of commitment to myself. So scheduling my time had to be more about desire than accountability. I really had to decide what I wanted and what I needed at that point in my life. And going through this is especially important for people who are starting their own business or switching a job or getting ready to take a break from the workforce for whatever reason. Maybe it's to have a child or to take care of a family member, or maybe you're going to go on a soul-searching mission or have your eat, pray, love moment of your life. you have to develop the skill of structuring your own time when someone else isn't controlling your time. Well, you could always go book yourself in an ashram in India because they will definitely control your time there. But when you're working on this yourself, when no one else is controlling your time, then you have to decide, what do I want to do? So these structures are very important. And I don't think that people recognize the importance of them quite enough, because if you really look at your life, it's a collection of the routines and the events and the behaviors that repeat in your life. And they are creating the structures of how you feel in each moment, structures of how you connect with people in each moment, creating the structures of where you go in your life, how happy you are, how able you are to surrender to the moment, to experience the moment. Because even with something like improv, for example, when you do improv, it seems quite unstructured and very flowy. We believe it's all free-flowing and has no structure. But really, in order to do improv, there has to be some structure. Maybe the structure is, I'm here with this group of people in this room or in this make-believe clown car, and there's an invisible framing around a situation. And if there's an invisible framing around a situation, people can work within that framing. Otherwise, it can go all over the place and people won't connect. In order to keep some connection, there is an invisible frame around it. What is that invisible frame in your life? Is it something unseen or unspoken? And maybe you can't see it, but you can infer it. So even if you have an improv group, there may be a prompt as a framing point, or a set amount of time as a framing point, or a theme as a framing point. So can you bring some visibility to your own framing points? Really look at them and see where they're taking you. They are not that different than the channels of your body, your digestive tract, your blood vessels, your pores, your respiratory system. All of these provide the structures for energy, different kinds of energy to flow through them. There are different ways to create a structure within a moment in order to really sink into that moment, because we know we all love to surrender, but sometimes we cannot surrender because there is not enough of the framing around a situation in order for us to relax into it. So it's really important when we can build these things for ourselves, because when we are older, you really can't expect other people to do it for you. So do this deep inner work to create your own structures, and even to recognize the structures that are already there in your life that you've surrendered to. Because the roads that you walk on, walking on a road, for example, somebody has paved that road for you. And that's how you know where to go. It's much easier than driving off-road. It's much easier. Hiking on a trail is much easier than hiking off a trail. It requires a different skill set. So in those moments where we need more surrender, look for the road, look for the framing, the doorway, the hiking path, the trail, so that we can soften through it and trust, because that's pretty amazing when that can happen. We'll need a lot more time, help, and powerful tools to design our own roads, though they may take us on quite a journey when we actually take the time to create them. I want to thank you for listening to this show. It brings me great pleasure to provide this content to you. I also want to let you know that I'll be making some very amazing announcements soon. And if you're not already on my email list, then I encourage you to go over to my website and subscribe to my email list, so that I can keep you informed about these announcements that are going to be coming up very soon. So my website is heathergrzych.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. And I look forward to getting these important announcements to you very soon and connecting. Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I really want to hear your feedback. To learn more about my work, visit heathergrzych.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. And meet me here next time on The Wisdom of the Body.